This is a walkthrough guide of the development for my AINT254 game, Neon Jump. Enjoy. So this was my first user testing session. I wanted to test the two basic mechanics, movement and shooting. So I set up a very quick little exercise where players could maneuver in between the blocks, trying to figure out how the jumping from one exact block to another worked. Overall, I thought it really worked really well. It showed me what people originally thought of the jumping mechanic, which was that it was a bit too clunky at this point, that it was too quick, that it's almost as if I'm just instantly there, which is why inferred that I set up a little range in which I could adjust that. I also wanted to test the shooting, so I set up some little targets that just destroyed when they got shot at, which was very simple, and just to see how the shooting went against the movement, as you're always going left or right. That doesn't depend on which way you're facing. So I wanted to see if users could get to grasp with that. So this section was very simple. It was just to test the movement of the player itself. It's just a blank area in which I played around with jumping, of how fast I wanted the animations to play, how quickly I wanted the person to jump from one square to another. So it was a good little setup I had just to test and to play around, where I could adjust the values of finding the ideal spot for movement. This is where I first implemented one of my bigger sections into the game, where I wanted to auto-generate challenges for the player to play. I decided that I was going to do this by creating a spawner which would spawn challenges and then spawn yet another spawner, and in that cycle you would just continuously go around. So for example, if I play it, you can see that there's a spawner, so it spawns it, and as the player then moves forward, it would create more obstacles as the player goes on, and that would be it. It was great. It worked really well. It's quite simple code, but it just takes a lot of prefabs to create in the correct locations that I had to make. So this section, I'm just testing a couple of the features where it created. This was the start of the spawner script I created that I go on to talk about more. It was very basic. I only had 2 challenges. Everything was near enough together. I just wanted to see the original, if it worked. This is before it generated another spawner, so this is just generating 3 challenges in front of the player. I just wanted to get the basics down, so I set up a little area like this and just played around with it for a while, trying to get the values right on how far distances between each objects and everything like that turned out to be. So at this stage, this is for one of my demo or dies. I decided that I wanted to test the movement again, but also explore the challenges that I wanted to include into the game itself. I created a simple prefab of a couple of animations with colliders on that would just detect when the player is over them, and that would influence a simple move in the player around. There's also a little train one as well, simply to help create obstacles for the player to move around in. It's really good from this feedback because it also helps show how the player kept an eye on everything. There is also enemies, so it reflected on how they kept an eye on the enemies while also having to watch the floor for the obstacles that are coming from the left and right. So this was a good example, I think, of how to test multiple areas in one go, or by just throwing it all in one, basically. So I must admit, it's a bit of a leap, and since the last Git push, that was due to not pushing to Git, so it's a bit of a jump, this one is. But this is the first iteration of what I completed for the game. It was I decided that I wanted to create the dark theme to give the neon some extra light and effects. So I decided that I was going to make everything dark and make everything neon. It's the same scripts, everything as normal, but I decided that I wanted to change up how the player feels, as the light mode made it feel a bit not neon enough for the neon theme of the game. So I ended up retexturing a couple of things. All of the challenges, now I went off the theme of lava, so red and light, to water and snow and ice. So I also created a snow particle effect, which follows the user around using the world spawn, I believe it's called. So it continuously makes snow but keeps the old one in the same position, so it's not dragging it along with it. So that was a really useful feature. So it's only a little one to keep it with the player itself. I also added the train to make some different textures, so it looks a bit less cartoony and a bit more just neon. The enemies I added a little face to. I was originally going to go with a snowman feel, but I thought the white matches too much against the white, so for now I just kept it as a cube square with a little face on. I will be changing that. I just need to think about what I want to create with what theme. I also took off the walls from the sides. I didn't want players to be felt like they're locked in, more of they're fading in. So from this I decided I wanted to create smoke where obstacles can fade in and out of. So the trains or the challenges fade through into the smoke instead of just suddenly going away, which seems quite nice because it gave the effect of they're not just coming out of nowhere. There's a player boundary that's before the smoke, so the player can't actually obviously go into the smoke, so it does stop them going into it. Besides this, I added some post-processing effects to the camera. I felt this was really useful because it gave that neon feel it showed the neon off properly rather than just basic emission. So I felt like that was a big feature. It also has some other features onto the camera that also just help with giving it a more realistic look. Like I also gave the camera motion blur. This helped make the game feel more realistic. It felt less chunky. As it blurs it down, it felt more realistic turnings, and it wasn't as cubey almost it felt, which was a good little feature that I added, and I'm glad I did. So after I created a dark mode theme, we ended up having some issues with submitted, so I decided that I wanted to go back and change some features that I created as I had some free time. I decided that the dark mode I wasn't really a fan of anymore, so I changed it back to light. It works a lot more. It looks a lot better with the snow floor as well as the walls, I've decided. It still has the neon glow. The neon is a bit stronger just to make sure you can see the neon. Other than this, I changed a couple of assets and main menu. I also added sound, but I will not play that because I'm very bad at editing, so the sound will definitely be too loud or too quiet. But I have also created, some main menu scenes. So if I go into game, I created some buttons. They're not the best, but they work perfectly fine, I decided, where you can go through the menus and navigate throughout the game. I have also created a high score table, so at the end you can find out your score and other high scores. Sadly, the font I'm using doesn't do numbers apparently, so that's a bit of an issue, but still. And I also created the start and end menu. I believe this was worked upon in the dark mode, but it was hard to see, so as one of the reasons I went back to white. So it's simply just the camera going through the game, generating the land as a bit of a background for the game. So I think that's it for the walkthrough. Thank you. And onto the code review. So this is my code review. I'm first going to be doing the basic movement script I created. This was the script that moved the player in forward, left or right. It was quite a challenge to make, I felt, because I wanted the feel of the players almost on a grid where each time they move it's a jump, it's a whole solid unity, like one distance, if that makes sense. So I decided that to do this, the best way would be to move the player physically and then add an animation alert that then progresses the player to that current location. To start off with, we have on platforms. These are mainly made for when the player is on a certain challenge I've created, as it uses the basic movement script to help move them along on that challenge. So what gets called continuously is the platform collision. This detects and tells if the player is on any collisions of the challenges. If it is, it gets the position of the current player rounded up to keep everything on integers as it is on a grid almost, the player is. It sets the default lerp times and current lerp times for the animation as they play. It says the start position, as I said earlier, to the position of the player. From here, it then gets the end position. So depending on what key you've pressed, on key what press, it's +1. So this is the automatic one. So it's automatically adding 1 every time it loops around. So it's just moving them in that continuous direction. In this case, it is the X. So it gets the end position, adds +1, so it knows where it's coming from and where it's going to. Simply from that, we just add a lerp, which goes from there using a time that I can change. The only way to get off this, however, is as you're on a challenge as it's pushing you either left or right, is to move forward. So I've got the only key code you can press is W, which is also forward, which tells them that you're not on the platform anymore, and it sets the new end position. From here, it gets the end position and calls end movement. I'll quickly scroll down to that, where it's pretty simple script. It just, as I said before, gets the lerps, get the animation for where the destination of the player. Other than that, we have, let me scroll up. We have the typical script. I've lost that now, 1 second. Here we go. So movement is the default script. So this is when the player isn't on any challenges, they're able to move in the forward, left or right position. It's quite similar to the old script, except it's just got a simple couple of if statements depending on what key you press is what direction it wants the end position to be. So if you press A, for example, to go left, it sets the position to -1x of your current location to give the effect of moving left. And then again, that just calls the end movement script method to set where the players are going. It's a pretty simple script. On top of that, we also have collisions. These are for hitting objects in front of you and hitting objects to your left or right. All these do is they get your current position and they set it back to where it was almost. So you start moving, you hit it, and then it moves you back. To do this, I had to do floor to int and CO to ints, because as I'm using everything on integers, I need to round it back. I can't just stop it in midair, as it won't match the grid feel to the game of being a 1 exact integers each time as you move along. It's pretty simple, and then it just calls the end movement again. There we go. The other script I want to look at is my spawner. It looks like quite a lot. It is quite a lot to understand. At first, it took me a while to understand. So to begin with, we just set the distance and the player. Underneath, we have challenges. So these are all the challenges I've implemented into the game. In the final version, this will be. So we have a lot of variations of the jumping puzzle, because we've got triple and a double one for different difficulties, really. So this will be used for when I want to make a variable for difficulty where the player can choose to make the levels harder. It will spawn the triples more and the singles less, as they were more challenging to overcome. It starts off with an update. So what it does is it gets the player, and it gets the player's position, and it's the spawner's current position, and it works it out, and it gets the distance in between them both. So then it knows if the distance is in between the range that I specified earlier. So that's normally I think it's about 50 in game. So that's about 50 blocks away. If it is in between, outside, it's going to get a random chance between 0 and 100. From here, it's just picking a challenge at random of which one it wants to spawn. That I need to tweak the numbers of the chances, as they seem to be a bit unfair at the moment, but that doesn't matter. Once it knows what chance it's going to get, once it's picked one, it then instantiates the object. It instantiates the object for the challenge, the current position of the spawner. From here, it then adds a spawner distance. So depending on the challenge, as they vary in sizes, you have to the width changes. So for example, in the simple lava single jump, it's a block wide. It wants I've done next spawner distance is 3. So then it adds a 3 block distance. It will to the next challenge. It will. After it's done that, it spawns the next spawner, and this is at the current spawner's location plus the distance to whatever I want the next challenge to be. So for example, in my example a second ago it was 3, so it'll do the same as this spawner but 3 more in the z-axis. After that, it will then destroy itself to keep it down, as it will not be required anymore. It's instantiated itself, so I can just destroy it. So I call it simple call destroy objects. So it just continuously goes, basically. It creates a challenge, makes another one of itself, and then deletes the old one, and then just continuously does that to give the endless feel to the game, which is good because it also creates a unique experience for the user, as they will always have something different to go on each time they play the game. It's always going to be different. The chances of having a lot of these at the same pace is ridiculous. So it's really useful for helping make a unique experience. I think that's it for everything. Thank you for doing it. This has been a great experience for me to make this game. I've learned a lot of how to do scripts and creating assets almost. There's things I'd like to change on in the future, but for now I think I've developed a lot of skills that I need to develop upon in my own time, and I've had a great time making it. I've had loads of fun.